A broke piano teacher interrupted her midnight practice to investigate a sound beneath her Steinway. What she discovered bleeding on her Persian rug was a tattooed Korean Mafia boss, and saving him would cost her the only sanctuary she had left. The coughing started at 11:34 p.m., just as Sophie Shelton's fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat. She'd been running through the piece for the last hour, desperate to perfect it for tomorrow's recital, the one that might save her studio. Rain hammered against the skylights of her loft space in downtown Chicago's warehouse district. She knew every inch of this studio, had been teaching here for 6 years, ever since she'd scraped together enough for the lease. The exposed brick walls, the scuffed hardwood floors, the antique Persian rug her grandmother left her. This was supposed to be her safe place, but you couldn't ignore that sound. Even muffled, even wrong, the wet rasp of it cut through the storm like something dying. Sophie's hands froze above the keys, Mozart's sheet music still clipped to the stand, her eviction notice buried somewhere underneath. She lifted her foot off the sustain pedal. Beyoncé's voice died in her earbuds as she pulled them out, straining to hear. Nothing. Then another cough. Thick, guttural, close. Sophie stood slowly, her forest green dress rustling against the piano bench. The studio was supposed to be empty. She'd locked the door herself. The nearest neighbor was 3 floors down in the jewelry studio, and Marcus always left by 9. She grabbed the only thing within reach, a brass metronome, and moved toward the sound. It was coming from beneath her Steinway. Sophie dropped to her knees on the Persian rug, her heart slamming against her ribs as she peered into the shadow under the piano. At first, all she saw was darkness. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw him. A man. Slumped against the piano leg like a broken marionette. Blood. So much blood. His charcoal suit was shredded at the shoulder, the white dress shirt underneath soaked crimson. One hand clutched his stomach where the fabric had turned black. The other hand, the one that shot out and grabbed her ankle with terrifying strength, wore an expensive watch that caught the lamplight. Sophie gasped, tried to jerk back. "Do not." His voice was gravel and smoke, his face tilted up toward hers, and she saw it then, the black dragon tattoo that crawled up his neck like it was trying to strangle him. Sharp, handsome features twisted in pain, eyes that should have been weak but burned with something fierce and focused. "Do not. Call. Police. You're bleeding, you need." "They sent them." His grip tightened on her ankle. His other hand moved, and she saw the gun. Not pointed at her. Just there, resting against his thigh like a promise. "Police are dirty. You call them." He coughed again, and blood flecked his lips. "We both die tonight." The skylights rattled. Thunder rolled across the Chicago skyline. And Sophie Shelton, who'd spent 28 years playing it safe, following every rule, staying in her lane, made a decision that would destroy her life as she knew it. She locked the studio door. Before we start, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and turn on notifications so you never miss what happens next. It truly means a lot to me seeing this community of thriller lovers grow across the countries worldwide. Every view, every comment, every share helps us bring more shocking stories like Sophie and Kim's to life. Together. Sophie's hands trembled as she twisted the deadbolt. The metallic click seemed to echo through the studio, final as a gunshot. She moved to the windows next, yanking down the bamboo blinds one by one, her reflection fragmenting and disappearing in each pane. Outside, Chicago's warehouse district stretched dark and empty, the kind of neighborhood that learned not to ask questions after midnight. The man was still conscious when she returned, though barely. His breathing had gone shallow, each exhale a wet rattle that made her think of her grandmother's final days in hospice. But her grandmother had been 83 and surrounded by family. This man couldn't be older than 35, and he was alone except for her. "I need to see the wound," Sophie said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. She knelt beside him on the Persian rug, close enough now to see the details. The dragon tattoo wasn't just on his neck, it curved around his jaw, disappearing into his hairline like it was trying to devour his face. His cologne was expensive, something with cedar and smoke. It mixed with the copper smell of blood. "You should! Run!" His eyes tracked her movement as she set down the metronome and reached for him. "Dangerous. To help me. You're bleeding out under my piano. I think we're past worrying about danger." Something flickered across his face. Not quite a smile, more like recognition. He let his head fall back against the piano leg, and Sophie saw the exact moment he made his decision too, the moment he chose to trust her, or at least to stop fighting her. She pulled the throw pillows off her reading chair and positioned them under his head, then grabbed the first aid kit from the bathroom. It was meant for minor cuts from sheet music paper and the occasional splinter from the piano bench. Not gunshot wounds, not whatever this was. But she also grabbed her sewing kit. The good one, with the curved upholstery needles and the heavy-duty thread. When she returned, his eyes were closed. For one horrible moment, she thought he'd died. Then his chest rose, fell, rose again. "Stay with me," she said, and this time her voice shook. "I need you conscious for this. What's your name?" "Kim." The word came out slurred. "Kim. Lee." Sophie's hands went still. She knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew that name, even if they pretended not to. Kim Lee, the Iron Dragon Syndicate. The Korean gang that ran everything from Chinatown to the South Loop. The one the newspapers called sophisticated because they didn't leave bodies in the street. Except apparently they did, sometimes. Just not their own. "Okay, Kim Lee." She opened the first aid kit, her musician's hands suddenly feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I'm Sophie, and I'm going to try really hard not to kill you while I save your life." This time he definitely smiled. Just a twitch at the corner of his mouth. But it was there. Noted. Sophie took a breath and reached for his jacket. The charcoal wool was custom-tailored, probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. She felt along his torso until she found the source of the bleeding, a hole in his side, just below the ribs, leaking steady and dark. The exit wound in his back was worse, ragged and ugly. "I need to cut your jacket off." "Do it." She used her fabric scissors, the ones she kept sharp for trimming the piano bench cushion. The suit fell away in pieces, revealing the white dress shirt underneath, now more red than white. His tie, pure silk, black as oil, was already loosened. She unknotted it completely and added it to the pile of ruined clothing. The shirt came next. She unbuttoned what she could, then cut the rest, trying not to think about the intimacy of it. Trying not to notice the lean muscle of his chest or the other scars that marked his skin. Old wounds, old stories. The dragon tattoo continued down, its tail wrapping around his collarbone. "Through and through," she murmured, examining the wounds. "That's good, right? The bullet's not inside you." "Good" is relative. His hand found hers, held it, not grabbing this time, almost gentle. "You're doing fine." Sophie threaded her needle with hands that had played Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 without missing a note. Hands that knew precision, that understood the difference between a quarter tone and a semitone. She could do this. She had to do this. This is going to hurt. Everything. Already hurts. She started with the exit wound in his back, rolling him just enough to access it. He didn't make a sound, but his hand clenched into a fist, his whole body going rigid. The stitches were crude, utilitarian, nothing like the delicate seams she'd use on a torn dress, but they held. She worked quickly, tying off each suture with the same focus she brought to learning a new piece of music. When she moved to the entrance wound, she was close enough to feel his breath on her face. Close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the way his jaw clenched with each pull of the thread. The dim light from her reading lamp cast shadows across his features, making him look like something from a Renaissance painting. Caravaggio, maybe. All dramatic chiaroscuro and hidden violence. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, his voice stronger now. The pain seemed to be focusing him. "I didn't. I'm making it up." She tied off the last stitch, then covered both wounds with gauze and medical tape, wrapping his entire torso. My grandmother taught me to sew. Everything else is just improvisation. You're good at it. Improvising. Sophie sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how close they'd been. Her green dress was soaked with his blood at the knees. Her hands were crimson up to the wrists. The Persian rug beneath them looked like something from a crime scene, which she supposed it was now. You should rest, she said, standing. Her legs felt shaky. I'll get you water. But his hand caught her wrist before she could move away. Not hard. Just enough to stop her. Thank you. 2 words. Simple. But the weight behind them was enormous, like he was thanking her for more than just stitches. Like he was acknowledging what she'd given up the moment she chose not to call 911. Sophie nodded and went to fill a glass from the bathroom sink. When she returned, his eyes were closed again, but his breathing had evened out. She set the water within reach and pulled her reading chair closer, settling in to watch him, to make sure he kept breathing, to make sure she hadn't just made the worst mistake of her life. The storm was weakening now, the rain softening to a steady patter against the skylights. Her phone sat on the piano bench, silent. No calls from students, no emails about tomorrow's recital, no messages from her landlord about the eviction. The world had narrowed to this, her studio, this man, and the choice she'd made. She must have dozed off, because when her eyes opened again, the quality of the darkness had changed. The storm had passed. The city lights filtered through the bamboo blinds in thin horizontal lines, striping the studio in amber and shadow. And Kim Lee was awake, watching her. Sophie jerked upright in her chair, her heart hammering. How long have you been? Not long. He was sitting up now, propped against the piano leg, one hand pressed to his bandaged side. His color looked better. Less gray, more human. You snore. I do not. But she felt her face heat anyway. How do you feel? Like I've been shot. He reached for the water glass, drank half of it in one swallow. His movements were still careful, guarded, but nothing like the dying man from hours ago. But alive. Thanks to you. Sophie stood and moved to the window, pulling back one blind just enough to peer out at the alley below. Empty. Dark. The jewelry studio's windows were still black. You said the police shot you? Not directly. They told the Red Lotus where to find me. He shifted, wincing. Close enough. Red Lotus? Rival organization. They've been trying to take Iron Dragon's territory for the past year. He said it matter-of-factly, like he was discussing quarterly earnings instead of gang warfare. Tonight they almost succeeded. Sophie let the blind fall closed and turned to face him. In the dim light, with his shirt gone and his tattoo on full display, he looked exactly like what he was. Dangerous. A predator. But he was also looking at her with something like respect, and that was more unsettling than the gun still resting on the floor beside him. Why didn't you fight back? She asked. When I found you. You could have threatened me, forced me to help you. But you didn't. Would threats have worked? She considered this. No, then there's your answer. He picked up the gun, and Sophie tensed, but he just checked the magazine with practiced efficiency before setting it down again. You're not the type who responds to force. You respond to reason, to choice. His eyes met hers. I gave you a choice. You chose to help. That makes you either very brave or very stupid. I'm not sure which one I am yet. Neither am I. But there was warmth in his voice now, almost amusement. Most people panic when they see blood. You just handled it. Like it was another problem to solve. I'm good at solving problems. Sophie moved back to her chair, but didn't sit. She felt too restless, too wired. I have to be. My studio's being foreclosed on. I'm 3 months behind on rent. Tomorrow's recital was supposed to bring in enough money to keep this place for another month, but she gestured at the blood-stained rug, the ruined suit, the chaos of the last few hours. I don't think I'm making that recital now. Kim was quiet for a long moment. Then, I can help with that. With the money, I don't want. Not charity. Payment. For services rendered. He touched his bandaged side. This level of medical care, plus the discretion, plus the risk you took, that's worth at least $50,000. Sophie's breath caught. 50,000 would cover her rent for a year, would let her focus on teaching instead of survival. But it would also make her complicit, wouldn't it? Turn her from a good Samaritan into an accomplice. Think about it, Kim said, reading her hesitation. No pressure. But the offer stands. Before Sophie could respond, something moved in her peripheral vision. She whipped around to the window, her heart rate spiking. There's someone outside. Kim was on his feet in an instant, moving faster than should have been possible for someone who'd been dying an hour ago. He pressed himself against the wall beside the window, gun in hand. Where? Allie. I saw. Sophie inched closer, peeking through the blinds. At first she saw nothing. Then a shadow detached itself from the dumpster across the way, human-shaped, watching her building. There, by the loading dock. How many? I don't know. At least one. She scanned the alley more carefully. Another shadow near the fire escape. A third beside a parked car. Her stomach dropped. Wait. That car. What about it? Sophie's mouth had gone dry. It's a silver Lexus. License plate starts with JBK. She knew because she'd seen it every Tuesday at 4 p.m. for the past 6 months. It belongs to James Park, one of my students' fathers. Kim's expression went cold and hard. Describe him. Late 40s. Glasses. Always wears a suit, even to his daughter's lessons. He says he's an accountant, works in the Loop. But even as she said it, Sophie was remembering odd things. The way Mr. Park always arrived early and sat in his car, watching the building. The questions he asked about the studio's layout. The expensive watch he wore too expensive for an accountant. He's not an accountant. Kim moved away from the window, already thinking, already planning. He's Red Lotus. They've been placing people in the neighborhood for months, gathering intelligence. He looked at her, and his expression was almost apologetic. They knew I'd run here if things went wrong. They've been watching you, Sophie. Using you. The words hit her like a physical blow. Her studio, her safe place, contaminated, violated. All those Tuesday lessons with Jenny Park, the sweet 8-year-old with perfect pitch, had that all been surveillance? A way to map out her space, her schedule, her vulnerabilities? They're going to come up here, she said quietly. Aren't they? Yes. When? Kim checked his gun again. Soon. They're waiting for something. Backup, probably. Or orders. He looked around the studio, assessing. Do you have another way out? Service exit? Fire escape? Fire escape leads to the roof. Roof access is locked. What about down? The jewelry studio. But Marcus left hours ago. Sophie's mind was racing now, that same problem-solving instinct kicking in. There's a service elevator at the end of the hall. It goes down to the loading dock, but that's where they're watching. I know. Kim moved to her piano, looking at the space behind it. How well do you know this building's acoustics? What? You're a musician. You understand sound, resonance, echo. He met her eyes. If they cut the power and come up here in the dark, could you track them by sound alone? Sophie thought about it. The studio's high ceilings, the exposed brick that created natural reverb, the hardwood floors that amplified footsteps. She'd spent 6 years learning every creak and groan of this space. Yes, she said. I think so. Good. Kim ejected the magazine from his gun, counted the bullets. Because we're about to run out of time. As if on cue, the lights went out. The darkness was absolute. Not the gentle dark of a bedroom at night, but the complete absence of light that came from a killed circuit. Even the ambient glow from the street was gone, swallowed by the blackout that had hit the entire block. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't see Kim, Couldn't see her piano, couldn't see her own hands in front of her face. For a moment, panic clawed at her chest, that primal fear of the unknown that lives in every human heart. Then Kim's voice cut through the dark, calm and steady. "Don't move. Stay exactly where you are." She heard him shifting, the whisper of fabric against wood. A moment later, his hand found her shoulder in the darkness, and the touch was grounding, real. She wasn't alone. "They cut the building's main power," he said quietly, his mouth close to her ear. "That means they're coming up. Maybe 2 minutes before they breach the door." She felt him press something cold and heavy into her hand. Metal, rectangular. "Spare magazine. 15 rounds. You know how to reload?" "No." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Push the magazine release here." His hand guided hers to a button on the grip of his gun. "Magazine drops out. Slide the new one in until it clicks. Pull the slide to chamber a round." He demonstrated in the dark, his movements precise despite his injury. "You understand?" "I think so." "You'll need to. I can take maybe 2 of them before I'm compromised." There was no bravado in his voice, just cold, tactical assessment. "The wound's already bleeding again. I'm getting weaker." Sophie's eyes were adjusting now, enough to make out shapes in the darkness. The piano, the windows, the faint outline of Kim's profile next to her. "What do we do?" "We use what we have. You said you could track them by sound?" He moved toward the piano, pulling her with him. "Then we make them think we're somewhere we're not." They positioned themselves behind the Steinway, using its massive bulk as cover. The piano had been her sanctuary, her art, her whole life. Now it was a barricade. Sophie felt the irony wasn't lost on Kim either, the way he ran his hand along its polished surface. "When they come through that door," he whispered, "they'll expect us to be on the other side of the room. By the windows, maybe. Or near the bathroom. They won't expect us here." He checked his gun again, more by feel than sight. "Let them enter. Let them spread out. Then you tell me where they are." "How?" "Listen. The way you'd listen to music. Every footstep has a pitch, a rhythm. Heavy boots on hardwood? That's percussion. Someone trying to move quietly? That's the soft pedal, the subtle notes between the obvious ones." His hand found hers again in the darkness. "You've trained your whole life for this. You just didn't know it." Sophie closed her eyes, even though it made no difference in the blackness. She focused on her breathing, slowing it down the way she would before a difficult performance. Centered herself. The studio around her came alive in her mind, the dimensions she knew by heart, the way sound traveled in this space, the echo points and dead zones. Then she heard it. The first sound that didn't belong. The stairwell door at the end of the hallway, opening with a pneumatic hiss. She'd heard that sound 1,000 times, knew its exact pitch and duration. 3 seconds of hiss, then the click of the latch catching. "They're in the hallway," she breathed. Kim shifted beside her, and she felt rather than saw him aim toward the studio door. "How many?" She listened. Footsteps, multiple sets, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding on the old floorboards. The building was nearly a century old, and every board had its own voice. The one outside the jewelry studio creaky, high-pitched. The one by the elevator silent, replaced last year. The one directly outside her door, 3, she whispered. "No, 4. One's hanging back." "Smart. That's the leader. He'll let the others go first." Kim's voice was barely audible. "When they breach, the first 2 will come in fast. 3rd one will cover. 4th will stay in the hall until they've cleared the space." "How do you—" "Because that's what I'd do." They waited. Sophie's heart hammered so hard she was sure it would give them away, but Kim's breathing remained slow and even beside her. She could smell his blood, fresh and copper bright, mixing with the rain smell still lingering in the studio. The doorknob turned. Slowly. Testing. Then faster. Then the door exploded inward with a crash that made Sophie flinch. Two figures burst through, shapes darker than the darkness, moving with military precision. She heard the whisper of their clothing, the soft slap of rubber soles on hardwood, the mechanical click of weapons being raised. "Clear left," a voice said in Korean. Sophie didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Professional. Controlled. Clear right. No visual. The third figure entered, moving toward the windows. Sophie tracked him by the change in air pressure, the way his presence altered the acoustic space. She squeezed Kim's arm once her signal, 3 inside. Kim's hand moved to her mouth, covering it gently. A warning. Don't speak. Don't breathe. The assassins were spreading out now, sweeping the studio in a grid pattern. One moved toward the bathroom, another toward her reading chair. The third was checking the windows, confirming what Sophie already knew: no one had gone out that way. "Nothing," the first voice said, frustration creeping in. "They're not here. They have to be here. The blood trail leads to this door." Sophie's breath caught. She'd been so focused on treating Kim, she'd never thought about the blood he'd left behind. Of course there was a trail. Of course they'd followed it. Check under the furniture. Behind the curtains. One set of footsteps moved closer to the piano. Sophie's whole body tensed. Kim's hand left her mouth and found the gun, his movements smooth and practiced despite the darkness. She could feel the tension in him, coiled and ready. The footsteps stopped. Right on the other side of the Steinway. Sophie held her breath. In the silence, she could hear everything: the assassin's breathing, the creak of leather as he bent down, the soft scrape of his weapon against the piano's leg as he started to look underneath. Kim moved. The muzzle flash was blinding in the darkness, a strobe of yellow-white that burned itself into Sophie's retinas. The sound was enormous, a concussive blast that made her ears ring. The assassin on the other side of the piano fell backward with a grunt, his weapon clattering across the hardwood. Then everything happened at once. The other 2 assassins opened fire toward the muzzle flash, their bullets punching through the studio's walls, shattering the windows, tearing into her furniture. Kim pulled Sophie down flat, covering her body with his as debris rained around them. She felt the vibration of his gun firing again, twice more, the heat and light of it searing through the darkness. Someone screamed. A body hit the floor, heavy and final, then silence. Not complete. Sophie's ears were ringing too badly for that, but the absence of gunfire felt like a physical thing. 2 down, Kim said, his voice tight with pain. 1 in the hall. And the leader, as if summoned by his words, a voice called out from the hallway. A voice Sophie recognized. "Mr. Lee, I know you're injured. I know you're running out of ammunition. Come out now, and we'll make it quick." The woman, too. Mr. Park. James Park, father of Jenny, Sophie's Tuesday afternoon student. The accountant who always wore suits and expensive watches. Speaking perfect, unaccented English now, all pretense dropped. Sophie felt something crack open inside her chest. Rage, maybe, or betrayal. Jenny was 8 years old. Had her father really used his own daughter as a surveillance tool? "He's at the door," she whispered to Kim. "Just outside. The 4th man, I can hear him breathing. He's to the left, by the stairwell." Kim nodded in the darkness. "I need you to do something for me. Something that's going to seem insane." "More insane than everything else tonight?" Despite everything, she heard the smile in his voice. "Much more." He pressed something into her hand. Small, rectangular, plastic. Fire alarm panel. "It's on the wall by the bathroom, about 4 feet up. The strobes will activate without the siren if you hold down the test button for 3 seconds. Can you get there without them seeing you?" Sophie looked at the space between the piano and the bathroom. Maybe 15 feet. In complete darkness, with armed men hunting them. "I can try." "Don't try. Do it." His hand found her face in the darkness, his thumb brushing her cheek. "When the lights start flashing, close your eyes. Count to 3, then open them and move. They'll be blind. You'll be able to see." "What about you?" I'll be handling our guests." He chambered another round, the slide's action loud in the quiet. Trust me? It was insane. Sophie barely knew this man. He was a criminal, a gang leader, someone who'd brought violence into her life and destroyed her sanctuary. But he'd also thanked her, protected her, looked at her like she was something more than just collateral damage. "Yes," she said. "I trust you. Then go." "And Sophie?" His voice stopped her. "Stay low. And whatever you hear, don't look back." She moved. The floor she'd walked across 1,000 times felt alien and treacherous in the darkness. Every footstep seemed loud enough to wake the dead. But Sophie kept her breathing steady, her movements fluid, using the proprioception she'd developed from years at the piano, knowing where her body was in space without looking. The bathroom wall found her outstretched hand. She felt along it, searching for the fire alarm panel. Her fingers brushed over the light switch, the towel rack, and then there, the smooth plastic cover of the alarm panel. She opened it as quietly as possible. Inside, she found the test button by feel, a rubber nub slightly raised from the others. Her thumb hovered over it. From the hallway, Mr. Park's voice came again. "I'm disappointed, Mr. Lee. I thought you were smarter than this. But I suppose desperation makes us all do foolish things." A pause. "Come out, or we're coming in. And we'll burn this place down around you." Sophie pressed the button. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the world exploded into light. The emergency strobes mounted near the ceiling fired in rapid succession, turning the studio into a nightclub from hell. Flash, flash, flash. Blinding white light that carved the darkness into stuttering fragments of reality. Sophie squeezed her eyes shut, counting. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. She opened her eyes. The assassin by the stairwell was clutching his face, his weapon dangling from one hand, completely disoriented. Mr. Park was in the doorway, his features twisted in fury and surprise, one hand raised to shield his eyes. Behind her, near the piano, she saw Kim rising like something out of a fever dream, his bare torso striped with blood and light and shadow, his gun raised. Kim fired. The assassin by the stairwell went down hard. Kim pivoted, fired again, but Mr. Park was already moving, diving back into the hallway with trained reflexes. The bullet sparked off the doorframe where his head had been a second before. "Sophie, down!" She dropped flat as Mr. Park returned fire from the hallway, his bullets punching through the doorway in a wild spray. The strobes kept flashing, turning everything into a series of still photographs. Kim, moving toward the door. Mr. Park, silhouetted in the hallway. The bodies of the fallen assassins, frozen in death. Flash, flash, flash. Kim reached the doorway and fired around it, but his hand was shaking now. The wound in his side had opened completely, blood streaming down his torso in rivers that looked black in the stuttering light. He was running on adrenaline and willpower, nothing else. Mr. Park laughed from somewhere down the hall. "You're dying, Lee. We both know it. Just make it easy on yourself." Kim's gun clicked empty. Sophie saw him try to reload, saw the magazine slip from his trembling fingers and clatter across the floor. He looked at her across the studio, and in that moment, in the flashing light, she saw something she'd never expected to see from him. Fear. Not of dying, of failing, of letting her down. Sophie didn't think. She just moved. The brass metronome sat on top of her piano, exactly where she'd left it hours ago when her biggest worry was perfecting Chopin. It was heavy, solid, vintage, the kind they didn't make anymore. Her grandmother had given it to her. Used it to teach Sophie rhythm and timing when she was 6 years old. She grabbed it and ran toward the doorway. Mr. Park stepped through just as she reached it, his gun rising to aim at Kim's head. He didn't see her coming. Didn't expect the fragile piano teacher to attack. His eyes went wide when she swung the metronome with everything she had, the same force she'd used to reach the fortissimo in Rachmaninoff's Third. The brass connected with his temple with a sound like a bell being struck. Mr. Park's head snapped sideways, his gun discharged, the bullet going wild, punching through the ceiling. He stumbled, tried to raise the weapon again. Sophie hit him again. And again. The metronome's wood base cracked against his skull. Blood sprayed across her green dress, her hands, her face. She didn't stop until he fell, until the gun dropped from his hand, until he stopped moving. The strobes kept flashing. Flash, flash, flash. She stood over Mr. Park's body, the broken metronome still clutched in her bloody hands, her chest heaving. In the stuttering light, she looked like something from a painting, something terrible and beautiful at once. Kim was staring at her. "Sophie, is he dead?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Flat. Distant. Kim moved to Mr. Park's body, checked his pulse. "No, but he won't wake up for a while." He looked at her with something like awe. "You saved my life." The reality of what she'd done hit her then. The metronome fell from her numb fingers, clattering to the blood-soaked floor. She'd nearly killed a man. Mr. Park, boring, accountant Mr. Park, who'd brought his daughter to piano lessons and made small talk about the weather. She'd beaten him unconscious with her grandmother's metronome. "We need to move," Kim said, pulling her attention back. "There could be more." "Where?" "Up. The roof. My people are coming, but we need to give them a clear extraction point." He swayed on his feet, caught himself against the door frame. "Can you help me?" Sophie looked at her studio one last time. The bodies, the blood, the shattered windows and bullet-scarred walls, the Persian rug that would never be clean again, the sanctuary she'd built, destroyed in a single night. Then she put her arm around Kim's waist, supporting his weight, and they moved toward the stairwell. The climb to the roof was an eternity compressed into minutes. Kim's breathing grew more labored with each step, his weight increasingly heavy against her. Blood left a trail behind them, bright and damning. Sophie focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on keeping them both moving, on not thinking about what would happen if they didn't make it. The roof access was supposed to be locked, but the door hung open. The lock sheared off. Someone had been up here recently. Sophie helped Kim through and into the open air. Chicago's skyline spread before them, a forest of lights that the blackout hadn't touched. The loop glowed in the distance. The lake was a dark smear to the east. The storm had passed, leaving the city washed clean and gleaming. Kim sank down with his back against the roof's low wall, his hand pressed to his side. "They'll be here soon," he said. 3 minutes. Maybe 5. Sophie knelt beside him, trying to assess how bad the bleeding was. Very bad, she realized. She pressed her hands over the wound, but blood welled between her fingers. "You need a hospital." "Can't. Too many questions." He looked at her, his face pale in the ambient city light. "But I'll make it. I've survived worse." "Have you?" "No," he admitted. "But I had to say something comforting. Despite everything, the violence, the fear, the insanity of the last few hours," Sophie laughed. It came out half sob, but it was genuine. "You're insane." "Probably." His hand found hers, squeezed weakly. "But so are you. You just didn't know it until tonight." Before Sophie could respond, the dragon tattoo on his neck caught her eye. Something about it nagged at her, familiar in a way she couldn't place. The curve of the tail, the position of the claws. She'd seen it before, somewhere other than the news. "Where did you get that tattoo?" she asked. Kim looked surprised by the question. "It's a family mark. My father had one. His father before him. Iron Dragon leadership carries the symbol." Sophie's blood went cold. She did know that tattoo, not from news reports or wanted posters, from a sketch in her late father's journal, the one she'd found after he died, hidden in his desk drawer, the one filled with names and dates and drawings that had made her realize her father, her kind, principled father who'd been a Chicago PD detective, had been dirty. "What was your father's name?" she asked quietly. "Park Jin-woo." Kim studied her face. "Why?" Because I think my father worked for him. The words tasted like ash. Marcus Shelton, homicide detective. He died when I was 16. Heart attack, they said. But I found things after. Journals, cash, and drawings of that tattoo. Kim went very still. Your father was Marcus Shelton? You knew him? He saved my father's life. Warned him about a raid that would have killed him. Kim's eyes were distant now, remembering. My father always said he owed Marcus Shelton an unpayable debt, that if Shelton's family ever needed anything. They looked at each other in the dim light, the weight of inherited connection settling between them. Their fathers had been bound together, for better or worse, and now, through blood and violence and impossible choice, so were they. The sound of helicopter rotors cut through the moment. Sophie looked up to see a black helicopter rising from behind the adjacent building. No lights, no markings. It swung toward them with military precision. That's my ride, Kim said, trying to stand. Sophie helped him up, supporting his weight as the helicopter descended toward the roof's small helipad. The downdraft whipped her hair around her face, threatened to knock them both over, but she held firm. The helicopter touched down. 2 men in tactical gear jumped out, rushing toward them. They took Kim from her, checking his wounds with efficient professionalism. One of them, a stocky Korean man with a scar across his jaw, looked at Sophie with open surprise. Boss? Who's this? The woman who saved my life, Kim said. Twice. He looked at Sophie, and despite his blood loss, despite the pain, his eyes were clear. Let her go. Make sure she's safe. Wait. Sophie caught his arm before they could carry him away. What happens now? The studio. My life. All of this. Give us 3 days, Kim said. 3 days to clean up the mess, to handle the Red Lotus response, to make sure you're not caught in the crossfire. The men were loading him into the helicopter, but he kept his eyes on her. Then I'll come find you, and we'll talk. About what? About choices. The scarred man was pulling him into the helicopter now, but Kim raised his voice over the rotors. About what you want. What you're willing to become. Because Sophie. He was inside now, but she could still see his face in the helicopter's dim interior. You're not the same woman you were 6 hours ago, and you can never go back. The helicopter lifted, taking him with it. Sophie stood on the roof, alone, covered in blood that wasn't hers, surrounded by the lights of a city that suddenly felt much larger and more dangerous than before. She looked down at her hands, at the blood under her fingernails, at the green dress that would never be clean again. Kim was right. She'd changed. The moment she'd decided to help him, the moment she'd locked that door, she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But had she changed into something terrible? Or had she finally become what she was always meant to be? Sophie didn't know. But she had 3 days to figure it out. The days passed in a strange fog. Sophie stayed in a hotel Kim's people had arranged a nice place in River North, paid for in cash. She watched the news obsessively, but there was nothing about the studio. No reports of bodies or gunfights in the warehouse district. It was like that night had never happened. On the second day, her landlord called. The eviction had been canceled. The back rent paid in full, along with a year in advance. An anonymous benefactor, he said. On the third day, she returned to her studio. It had been cleaned. Professionally, thoroughly, new windows, new walls. The blood was gone from the Persian rug, or maybe it was a new rug, identical to the first. Her piano sat exactly where it had been, but when she sat down to play, the keys felt different under her fingers. Or maybe she felt different. She was working through a scale when the door opened. She knew without turning who it would be. Kim looked better. Mostly healed, or at least mobile. He wore a different suit, charcoal gray like the one she'd cut off him, but this one fit him like armor. The dragon tattoo was still visible above his collar. The man with the scarred jaw was with him, standing back by the door. Your studio looks good, Kim said. It's perfect. Too perfect. Sophie turned on the bench to face him. Like that night never happened. It happened. The Red Lotus knows it. They're backing off. At least for now. Mr. Park was their best operative in this district. Without him, they don't have the infrastructure to move on us. He walked closer, his movements still careful. You bought me time. Maybe years. That's valuable. I'm glad I could help. Sophie heard the ice in her own voice. Was there something else? Kim pulled out an envelope, set it on the piano. 50,000. Like I promised. No strings. You can take it and walk away. And I'll make sure you're never touched by this world again. Sophie stared at the envelope but didn't reach for it. That's one option. What's the other? The other option is more complicated. Kim leaned against the piano, close enough that she could smell his cologne again. Cedar and smoke. I need someone to run a music foundation. Real foundation, real work, real students. But it'll also provide cover for certain financial operations. You'd be legitimately teaching, legitimately helping young musicians, but you'd also be part of Iron Dragon infrastructure. You want me to launder money through music lessons? I want you to do what you've always done. Teach. Build. Create beauty in this ugly world. He met her eyes. But yes, there would be other responsibilities. And risks. The Red Lotus won't stay quiet forever. Being associated with me means being a target. Sophie thought about the last 3 days, the emptiness of the hotel room, the way her hands shook when she tried to play, the way the old Sophie, the cautious, careful woman who'd spent her whole life playing it safe, felt like a stranger. She thought about Kim's blood on her hands, the weight of the metronome, the moment she'd chosen violence to save a life. If I do this, she said slowly, I want real funding, real resources, free lessons for kids who can't afford them, a scholarship program, instruments for schools that don't have them. Done. And I want to know everything. No secrets about what you're doing with my foundation. I won't be a pawn. Fair. And I want... Sophie hesitated, surprised by what she was about to say. I want to learn. How to protect myself. How to do what you do. See what you see. I'm not going to be helpless again. Kim smiled. Not the pained grimace from that night, but something genuine. I was hoping you'd say that. He straightened, wincing slightly. The foundation papers are already being drawn up. Your name as director. Real board. Real oversight. But the money flows through certain accounts. You'll learn how it works. When do I start? Tomorrow. If you want. He held out his hand. Partners? Sophie looked at the hand he offered. Shaking it would mean everything. No going back. No returning to the woman she'd been. She'd be Sophie Shelton, still piano, teacher, musician, artist. But she'd also be something new. Something dangerous. She thought about her father. About the secrets he'd kept. The compromises he'd made. About the weight of the choices that defined a life. Then she reached out and took Kim's hand. Partners. His grip was firm, his smile genuine. The man with the scarred jaw stepped forward, handing Kim a small box. Kim opened it, revealing a simple silver bracelet engraved with a tiny dragon. Welcome to Iron Dragon, Kim said, fastening it around her wrist. Sophie Shelton, our newest asset. He paused. And the only person who's ever beaten a Red Lotus enforcer to death with a metronome. Nearly to death, Sophie corrected. Still impressive. She looked down at the bracelet, feeling its weight. Light, but somehow significant. What happened to Mr. Park? Hospital. Under guard. He'll live, but he won't be playing piano anytime soon. Kim's expression darkened. His daughter Jenny, though she's safe, she never knew what her father really was. I made sure she was placed with relatives who aren't in the life. Something in Sophie's chest loosened at that. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm not a good man, Sophie. I never will be. He turned toward the door, the scarred man following. But I keep my promises, and I protect what's mine. After they left, Sophie sat at her piano for a long time, looking at the bracelet on her wrist. Then she placed her hands on the keys and began to play. Not Chopin this time, not something delicate and refined. She played Rachmaninoff, the third piano concerto, the hardest piece she knew, full of fire and fury and impossible passion. Her hands didn't shake. Her fingers found every note, every chord, every devastating crescendo. The music filled the studio, spilling out through the new windows into the Chicago night. And for the first time in years, Sophie felt truly alive.